Welcome back, guys. In this episode, we'll be talking about used range versus current region. Okay, so these are two terms that every VBA developer should be familiarized with, and should they should be able to tell the difference between them. Okay, so this is what this video is all about. It's going to explore the fundamental difference between current region and used range. Okay, and then we're also going to touch on another two functions that I've not touched previously. This will be the rows and the columns function. Okay, we have touched on row and column, rows.count and column.count, right? Columns.count. We haven't touched rows and columns. Okay, the plural form of the row and column, which we touched earlier, right? So I have this worksheet with two range. Okay, they are not continuous by any means. Okay, I have range 1 populated with the number 50. Okay, and then I have range 2 populated with the number 30. Okay, so we'll get onto that in a while. Let's get started. Okay, so I've named this module current region used range. Okay, so what exactly is current region? Okay, this is a term that you're going to come across a lot as you progress through VBA, right? Or when you are trying to look for solutions out online. Okay, you're going to hear these a lot from the problem solvers out there, right? So I just want to make sure that you're very clear about what it is. Okay, so the current region basically is used for continuous range, and it requires a starting point of reference. I mean, this starting point of reference requires a cell address, basically, right? And this cell address is usually the left top cell of the range. Okay, so as I've said, current region is for a continuous range. Okay, so you can either select this range or this range. Okay, but you can have both of them. That's why we're going to use the used range. Used range would be able to accommodate these two non-continuous range, but for the current region, we can only accommodate a continuous range. So either this range or this range, whichever you want. Just go with this range, and the starting address of this range is A4. Okay, the leftmost part, the top left of the address is A4. Okay, so if I highlighted them, no big deal. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to name this dim RNG as range. Okay, so because range is an object, we're going to use the word keyword set. Okay, set RNG equals to sheet 1 because I'm on the same module, so I can just name it with a code name. It just so happened that the code name and tab name is the same, right? So I just want to prove that I'm using the code name, so I'm just going to name this something. Okay, exercise. Okay, and the tab name is exercise, the code name is sheet 1. So we're still going to use the code name because the worksheet and the macro are on the same workbook. So I could use the sheet name. I've repeated this several times, but I am repeating it again because this is important for you to understand. Okay, so sheet 1 dot range. What was the starting cell? A4, right? That was the one that we highlighted in green. And I'm just going to use the word current region. You can see IntelliSense have identified it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to debug.print this address, okay, to see if it's able to pick up this range that of the current region. Okay, so I'm just going to run this code. Okay, at 5, or just you can hit this, right, and you can see that VBA has picked up the range that we are referring to, which is the range that I've mentioned here, right? The first continuous range, which is A4 going all the way up to J25. So you don't necessarily have to do something like, range equals to sheet 1 dot range, A4 to J, A4 to J, and, having the last row, whatever it is. You don't have to do something like that, right? You could just use the current region, okay, which is perfectly fine. So this is one of the advantage of the current region over what I just mentioned earlier, right? So instead of sheet 1, we could also use active sheet, which means the macro would actually run on the active sheet, right? So set RNG equals, instead of sheet 1, we have the active sheet, right? Active sheet dot range A4 dot current region. Okay, so let's just test this. Okay, I'm going to be on I'm going to be on sheet 1, right? This sheet 1, and then I'm just going to add another sheet. So I'm going to run this macro on sheet 1. So while I'm on sheet 1, while I'm on the active sheet, which is the tab name exercise, also known as the code name sheet 1, right? So I'm just going to run this, and then we're going to go back to the VBA editor, and you can see that I'm on A40J25, right? Just hang on a second. I have to debug.print the second section as well. So range dot address. Okay. Right. So we're going to go back again. We're going to run it. Okay. We're going to run the macro. We're just going to go to the develop macro and run it. And then we're going to go back to the VB editor to prove that, okay, well, the active sheet, the first part is the debug.print range dot address. A40J25 using sheet 1, and then the active sheet also returns A40J25 because it so happened that the active sheet and sheet 1 are the same, right? Because, yeah. So now let's get on to the second sheet and run the macro on this completely empty sheet, right? So if we run that, what do you think we're going to get, right? Sheet 1, which is still referencing the sheet 1, right? A40J25. But the active sheet, which was the blank sheet, right? What was the current region? You see, this is returning its A4, right? So there's no range. That's why it's just giving us it's giving us A4, right? Basically what we have identified here. Okay. So I hope you guys are getting a hang of it, all right? Now let's talk about used range. Okay. Used range is used for non-continuous range. Okay, it does not require a starting point of reference, right? Because unlike current region, where we had to identify the top left part of the range, which is ideally what we do all the time. I've never tried identifying it with cell B4 or C4. I've always stick to the top left part of the cell address as my starting point of reference in current region. Okay, but in the case of the used range, you do not have to do that, right? You do not have to do that. So we're just going to dim RNG to as range. Okay, then I'm going to set, because it's a range, it's an object variable. I'm going to say active sheet, or you can use sheet 1, whatever you want, right? Used range, and I'm going to debug.print rng2 dot address. Okay, so let's run this macro, right? I'm going to just set a breakpoint here, and then we're going to run the macro. Okay, so we've reached the breakpoint, and I'm just going to hit F8. And look at that, A4 to X42. Okay. What it's going to do is, what it has done is it's actually taken all the used range in this worksheet and active sheet, meaning that we're on this sheet, right? So you can see that it's gone all the way down to W42. Oh, X42. Why is it referencing X42? Yes, because we are going all the way up to X42. Okay, so that is what makes used range so powerful, because it allows us, right? Allows to select two non-continuous range, right? So the current region is continuous. Used range is non-continuous, right? So now let's talk about finding the loss rule for the used range and for the current region. But before we go into that, right, before we go into L rule, last row of current region and used range, let's talk about rows and columns, right? What are these? We have spoken about row, column, rows dot count, columns dot count, right? We have spoken about them in the previous video, right, where we went into the specifics of referencing last row and last column, right? But what about rows and columns? Well, rows and columns are actually used for extracting the row and column of a range specified. So what do I mean by this? All right, okay. So let's just have a variable dim rows extract as range. Okay, just gonna have this as range, and I'm gonna set, because it's a range variable, right? So set rows extract is equals to sheet1 dot range. So I'm just gonna take any range, A5 to D20, right? You can take any range. I'm just gonna say I want to have the address of the row, the third row of this range, right? So I want to extract the third row of this range, and if I debug dot print rows extract, right? That's the name. Dot address. What do you think we're gonna get? What do you think we're gonna get? Let's run that. Okay. Let's set a breakpoint here, and then let's run the code. And then we're just gonna delete all of them, and then we're gonna go. Look at that. It's giving us A7 to D7 because A5 to D5 is the first row, A6 to D6 is the second row, and A7 to D7 is the third row, right? So that's why it's giving us A7 to D7. That's the third row, right? So the rows and columns are used for extracting the corresponding rows and column of what we mentioned, right? So with that in mind, we're going to go into how to find the last row of current region and the last row of the used range. Okay, so before I get to that, okay, so we are on the A7 to D7, but what if we want to get the row positioning, right? What we could do actually, right? What we could do is we could say, right, set dim. Okay, I'm just gonna dim row number as long, right? Okay, I just want to make sure that you understand this, right? Row number is going to be sheet1 dot range A5 to D20. This was what we mentioned earlier. Rows 3 dot row. So this gives us the position of the row. It gives us the position of the row, okay, that we have extracted from the range using the rows. Okay, so the rows and columns are extracting the row and column for the range. The row and column is used to get the position of the row and the column that we are designating, right? So if I run this, we're just going to set a breakpoint here, right? And then we're just going to hit F5, and then we'll clear all of this. Then we're just going to hit F8. No, I have not debugged that. Gosh, what is wrong with me? Right? I'm just going to clear the breakpoint, and I'm just going to say debug dot print rows number, right? So we're going to run that again. We're going to set a breakpoint here. Then I'm just going to hit F8, and then we're just going to clear all of this, and then just hit F8, and look at that, 7, right? So A7 to D7, right, corresponds to the 7th row. Okay, so with that in mind, let's get on to finding the last row for use range and current region. Okay, so if you have understood this, then it becomes really simple, right? The last row of current region is exactly the same as what I've taught you here. You can use a combination of the rows and row, right? So dim L row C region to get the last row of the current region as long, right? And then I'm just going to have this, copy it, paste it. And we're going to say, okay, we have identified the range for the current region, which was RNG, right? So we're just going to use that, right? RNG dot rows, right? What rows are we talking about? What rows that we are referencing? We are referencing the last row of the current region, right? So we're going to say range dot rows dot count, right? Am I right? Rows. So what range dot rows dot count? Remember in the previous video we said if you have a range and then you have the rows dot count, it's going to give us the number of rows basically in the range, right? So this is what it does, and then we're just going to do dot row, right? Dot row, right? And I'm just going to debug dot print L row C region. Okay, and then we're going to do the same for finding the last row of UsedRange, right? Right. So dim L row U range as long, and then I'm just going to say L row U range equals to range. Which range was it for the used range, right? We mentioned it earlier with active sheet. Okay, range 2, RNG2, right? RNG2, which was the range for the used range. Range 2 dot rows. What rows are we talking about? The same thing. Range 2 dot rows dot count, right? Dot row, and that returns us the last row of the used range. Okay. So I'm just gonna hit a breakpoint here, and then I'm just gonna run the code. I'm gonna clear the breakpoint, and we're gonna see the result much clearer. Okay, so 25. Okay, so are we in 25 for the use range, right? Yep, on row 25. And then what about for the used for the current region in 25 used range? We are on 42. Are we on 42? Right, this is the last row of the used range, right? 42. Exactly. You're 100% accurate. Okay, so that's about it, guys. On used range versus current region. I hope you guys have learned something. This is how I generally go with my video playlist, right? For my class, basically, we start from something small and then we grow into something bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so it's important that you understand everything that is being taught up to this point, right? So I highly advise that you follow what I've been doing, right, and to practice it by yourself. Okay, so if you have any questions, please post in the comment. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.